Hello and welcome to another episode of He Says, She Says movie reviews. I'm Dave G.
And I'm Lee G.
And today we're taking a look at a movie that has been remastered and put back into cinemas right now, and that is Titanic. Now, of course, way back in 2012, Titanic was turned into a 3D movie, which looked very, very good in 3D. Now James Cameron, to celebrate the 25th anniversary, which was actually last year, he went back and remastered it and tweaked the 3D just a little bit. Now they've brought it back out into cinemas. It was brought out for Valentine's Day so that people could go back and see the greatest love story ever told on screen once again on Valentine's Day. Lee, what did you think going back and seeing Titanic after 25 years?
I really love seeing it on the big screen again. Certainly I've seen it on our small screen at home a number of times since it's been made because it is one of my favourite films. But seeing it in the cinema again in 3D, it was just brilliant.
Now, I didn't need much convincing to go back and see this because I think I surprise people sometimes as a film critic when they ask me what some of my favourite films of all time are. And one of my favourite films that I always say is Titanic. Titanic was one of the reasons why I got into screenwriting and filmmaking, was because I remember watching it and sitting there and thinking, wow, this director has just dumped Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water onto his cast to get the shots that he wants, and I wanted to do that as well. So Titanic was one of the films that actually got me really interested in filmmaking and screenwriting, so I didn't need much convincing to go back and see this film. But what does it look like on the screen after 25 years? Does it look dated or anything like that?
Not at all. I think movies being made today can't live up to that kind of standard. The amount of effort that went into this movie, from subs that went into the ocean to see the original Titanic. I mean, how many films would go to that extreme, and to spend that much money, that much time, that much research to make it so real because it is based on a true story. And then, of course, progressing to the storylines on the ship with the romances and the beautiful costume design and all these things. The design of the ship, the intricate things that you see from, cups and plates on shelves, everything just looks stunning.
One of the things that really hit me by going back and watching it this time was that how, in a way, CGI has almost ruined the Hollywood experience. Going back and watching a film where, as I said before, the director was asked, how do we make this look realistic? And he went, well, we flood the set. Whereas a couple of nights after we saw Titanic, we went and saw the new Ant-Man movie, where the entire film feels like it's a CGI film with the actors acting in front of a green screen for most of the time. So go back and watch Titanic. And I know one of the reasons why I feel that this film doesn't look dated is because James Cameron is always so far ahead of what other directors are doing in Hollywood that some directors are only catching up to what he did in Titanic. But I felt that one of the things, like I said, I really noticed going back and watching it was how relieving it was to go back and watch a movie where the director didn't rest on a lot of CGI. There is CGI in there, of course, and anyone that's ever gone back and watched the Terminator movies, you'll see that James Cameron was so far ahead, even with them with CGI, that some film companies still haven't caught him. But to go back and watch this and actually see Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio floundering through water and stuff like that, knowing now as well, because you and I have watched a lot of making ofs and that as well for Titanic, and knowing that they were suffering from hypothermia and stuff like that because of what James Cameron put them through, it just makes you realize that it almost, in a way, Hollywood's taken a step backwards, that we're not doing a lot of this stuff anymore. And I know people would even say, well, James Cameron's not either with Avatar, but there's still a lot of Avatar that's real and not green screen. He does use some green screen, but a lot of it is really real as well. So I think that was one of the things I really took away from this, was that how that we've taken that step backwards when it's come to using CGI rather than just letting a director do his vision like James Cameron did here with Titanic.
And I think it also shows the standard of the actors as well, is that they're willing to go to those extremes to make it look so real. I have to say, Kate Winslet is probably my all-time favourite actress, and I truly admire Leonardo DiCaprio as well for the realism he puts into movies, and he almost lives out those characters in real life until he completes a movie as well.
Yeah, one of the things I think that was one of the things I noticed as well, and one of the things I really noticed this time as well was how good Billy Zane was in this. I mean, we quite often just kind of think of him as the bad guy in this film, but he actually does a really, really good job in playing that villain in this role, and I know it held him back in Hollywood for a few years after that because he was so universally not liked in that role. Was there anything that you noticed this time when you watched Titanic that you hadn't really noticed before? Because I find every time I watch Titanic, I find myself fixating on something different every time. Was there something this time around that you kind of noticed or concentrated on that you feel like you hadn't done that so before?
Right at the very start of the movie, although I've seen it so many times, the photos of real life people stood out to me.
Yeah.
In black and white, which I'm sure I've seen over and over, but it just stood out more this time, and probably because it was on the big screen. And so that set up to this is real. Like there's a storyline, a romantic storyline through it that, of course, is dramatized. But just that grounding from the very start is a reminder of this is a real story. The Titanic did sink, and so then when it came to the scenes of when the ship's starting to sink and it becomes real that people are going to die, it made it stand out more. So when there's a mother with two children and she's got the two children lying in a bed, and she knows her children are about to die, and she's keeping them calm, and she's got a soft, gentle voice. And then it also has an older couple who are lying on their bed, and they're getting ready to go down with the ship, and they're going to die. And so it just made it more real, flashing back to that original piece of photography where, that reminded you this isn't just a movie. This is a piece of history.
I actually read something really interesting about that old couple, because I noticed that this time in the film as well, and I was wondering why Cameron was focusing on them. And I actually went back and read that apparently they were based on a real couple. They were a couple that were like billionaires of today that owned one of New York's most prestigious stores. And in the original screenplay, and I'm guessing it must have actually been filmed as well, they were actually main cast members of Titanic, but then James Cameron cut that storyline out, but he left their death scene in there because he thought it was so touching. So yeah, you'd probably feel a bit ripped off if you were those actors that was the only time you got. What I really noticed this time was every time when I go back and think of Titanic, I always think of the scenes on the boat, and I always forget those scenes that are in modern day off the boat, the scenes with Bill Paxton and Gloria Stewart. I really took notice of them this time and watched that character change for Brock Lovett, which is the Bill Paxton character. I watched that change from how he went of being this money-hungry guy that just wants this necklace, and when Old Rose, played by Gloria Stewart, first arrives on the boat, he's just like, get that old bag to tell me where it is, I want to find it, kind of thing. And then by the end of it, he's enraptured in her story, and money's not an important thing to him anymore. The other thing I really noticed this time, and I know it's something I've noticed previously because I've bought the CD and I've got the album, but James Horner's soundtrack to Titanic, when people think of the Titanic soundtrack, they always just think of the Celine Dion song. But James Horner's film score in this is just absolutely amazing. For the couple of days after I went back and watched Titanic this time, I was listening to it on Spotify the entire time. It is such a beautiful, beautiful soundtrack. One of my favorite soundtracks of all time is the Pearl Harbor soundtrack, which is such an amazing Hans Zimmer soundtrack. But this is right up there. James Horner did such an amazing job. And when you actually go back and listen to the soundtrack on Spotify, you can imagine the moments that it's lifted from in the film, because your mind instantly goes back, and it's such an amazing soundtrack. So if you've never had a copy of the Titanic soundtrack, I highly recommend you going and getting it, because it's such an amazing soundtrack. It's one of those soundtracks that will take you back to the film, but also relax you at the same time.
Definitely. It's certainly a soundtrack worth getting.
So I guess, what are you going to give Titanic out of 5? And should people go along and see this remastered 3D version?
Well, I think if you haven't seen it on the big screen for a while, do it. Regardless of whether it's 3D or not. It's something quite special to be able to go and see a movie that you love in the cinema again. But I would say that seeing it in 3D is a real treat as well. The visuals, I think, especially of when the ship is sinking or when it hits the iceberg, those sorts of scenes are amazing in 3D. And also at the very start of the movie, where they've got the little subs or rovers, I'm not sure of the exact term for them, but when they're exploring the real Titanic, that's something special to see in 3D as well. You also see a brilliant cast. I mean, fast forward 25 years, we've seen some of these amazing actors in other roles. I mean, you've got people like Victor Garber. I've got a real soft spot for him as an actor. I just love his performances. Bill Paxton is amazing in many things. You've got Kathy Bates, Billy Zane, Kate Winslet, Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, there's too many to name. There are so many more names on the list. And to see them all come together in a movie, you've just got such top quality there. And of course, directed by the best, and cinematography by the best. I mean, I just think it is totally worth seeing again.
Yep, and one of our best directors of all time. Talking of him, his scientists still do a lot of work on deep sea diving and are always doing little investigations. You want to hear something interesting that James Cameron's scientists just worked out recently?
Yes, I do.
Going back and having a look at the wreck of the Titanic, they realized that if the captain of the ship hadn't have turned the Titanic and he had just let the boat hit the iceberg full on, it wouldn't have sunk.
Such, a tragedy.
Yeah.
And, there's no words to describe that. And hindsight's a great thing, but at the time, people don't know these things. And I think the movie really portrays the distress of people who went through such a tragedy. And really, this whole movie is about wanting to save people, not only from the ship sinking, but if you look at Rose's life, the storyline was about trying to save her from the life she didn't enjoy, she didn't like, and she was going into depression in some of the movie because
she was
of
going
her
to kill
life.
herself. Yeah,
she was. And there were, there's lines of domestic violence in there. Now it was more verbal, and there was some physical. But there are some really strong storylines within the major story. So I would say don't miss out. Go and see it again.
And what are you going to give this one out of 5?
I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. I really don't think there are many movies that can hit the heights of what they've achieved here, and to hold up 25 years later, whether it's been remastered, even if it hadn't, I think it would still stand up.
Yeah, I'm giving it a 5 as well. It is still my second favorite movie of all time. When I put together my list of top 3 movies of all time, it's still Trainspotting, Titanic, and The Beach as my 3 top films of all time. So I'm giving it 5 as well. So that's it for this episode of He Says, She Says movie reviews. Lee gave Titanic, the remastered 3D version, 5. I've given it 5 as well. For now, I've been Dave G.
And I'm Lee G.
And we'll be back soon with another episode of He Says, She Says movie reviews.